He dumped her when he found out about the 17 twins. 20 years later, he came back and couldn't believe his eyes. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. Jasmine Brown had learned early in life that silence could mean many things. Sometimes it was peace, sometimes waiting, and sometimes it was the space before everything fell apart. At 28, she had mastered the art of reading the silence between moments, of measuring breath against tension, and of standing firm in a world that rarely made room for women like her. She lived in Atlanta, in a 2-bedroom apartment nestled above a corner convenience store that buzzed with the sound of late-night foot traffic and the occasional siren. The space wasn't much, but it was hers. The walls were lined with photos of family, her mother smiling in a faded kitchen, her younger sisters in graduation gowns, and her late father, his arms folded over his overalls, standing with quiet pride next to a rusting pickup truck. Jasmine had carried the weight of their futures on her back ever since her parents died 5 years apart. She had worked 2 jobs to put her sisters through school and had paid off her father's funeral with a month's worth of missed meals. By day, she was a nurse at Greenlight Community Clinic, a place underfunded but overflowing with purpose. There, she tended to children with cracked voices and aging grandmothers who spoke in riddles and recipes. It wasn't glamorous, but Jasmine loved her work. She loved the feeling of purpose it gave her, the way people's eyes softened when she walked into the room. Her touch was calm, her presence steady. In the corners of her mind, though, a dream waited quietly. The dream of opening her own pediatric clinic in the same neighborhood where she'd grown up. A place that didn't turn away children because their parents couldn't pay. A place full of laughter, clean light, and safety. She had plans, even if she didn't always say them out loud. She saved a portion of every paycheck, stashing it in an envelope marked simply, Clinic. It sat beneath a false drawer in her dresser, untouched except for monthly editions and the rare pause when she dared to imagine what her name might look like engraved on a brass plaque. Her life was full, if not easy, and for the most part she was content. She had learned not to expect miracles, but miracles, it turned out, didn't ask for permission to arrive. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she met Daniel. He had come into the clinic with his niece, a spunky 6-year-old with a crooked ponytail and a scraped chin. Jasmine was wrapping gauze around the girl's arm when Daniel said, "She doesn't like needles, but she likes you." His voice had the kind of smoothness that came from private schools and soft leather shoes. His smile was lopsided, but it reached his eyes. Jasmine looked up, offering a small smile. That's the goal. Distract them before the fear kicks in. He laughed, a quiet, appreciative sound. Seems to be working. Over the next 30 minutes, while the niece babbled and Jasmine worked, Daniel lingered. He watched her with a quiet curiosity, asking polite questions. How long she'd been working there, if the clinic was always this busy, whether she ever took time for herself. His tone wasn't flirtatious exactly, but it had a warmth she wasn't used to. Most men either ignored her or tried too hard. Daniel did neither. At the end of the visit, he handed her a business card. "In case you ever want to grab coffee," he said. "No pressure, just thank you for the way you were with her. My sister was nervous about bringing her here, but you made it feel like home." Jasmine almost didn't call him. She had built her life around caution, around the idea that stability was better than spontaneity. But that night, as she sat with tea in hand and aching feet in a basin of warm water, she turned the card over twice and dialed the number. Their first meeting outside the clinic was at a modest coffee shop in Midtown. Jasmine wore navy blue scrubs and a cardigan that smelled faintly of antiseptic. Daniel arrived in a crisp shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a hint of cologne that reminded her of cedarwood and after rain. They talked for 2 hours. About books, about childhood, about the strange comfort of familiarity in a world so quick to forget names. He asked about her work, and she asked about his. He worked in insurance, he said, with a sheepish grin. Not exactly saving lives, but somebody has to do the boring math. He didn't ask her why she hadn't been married, and she didn't ask him why he was still single at 32. They simply talked. And for Jasmine, that was enough. Over the next few months, they became a pair, not in the loud, public way. Jasmine wasn't built for spectacle, but in the soft, unspoken kind. He'd wait for her outside the clinic with lunch or walk her to her car after late shifts. They read books together and argued about characters. He helped her fix the broken railing on her apartment stairs, and she taught him how to make cornbread from scratch. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. But not everything was easy. Daniel's family was distant. When Jasmine finally met his parents at a Thanksgiving dinner, the silence that followed her introduction was palpable. His mother smiled too tightly. His father shook her hand without looking her in the eye. After dinner, Daniel told her not to take it personally. They're old school, he said, but they'll come around. Jasmine didn't believe that, but she nodded anyway. Love, she thought, was worth the risk. He proposed in spring, on a quiet evening with cherry blossoms falling like confetti in the park near her apartment. He didn't kneel. He just took her hand and said, "I want to build a life with you, no matter what." She said yes. They married in a small ceremony 2 months later. Jasmine wore a simple white dress, her hair pulled into soft curls. Daniel wore navy. Her sisters were bridesmaids. His parents did not attend. It didn't matter. Jasmine stood beside the man she loved and believed, with all her heart, that the hardest part was behind them. They moved into a modest house on the south side of the city. It wasn't perfect. The roof needed work, and the kitchen still had linoleum floors, but it had a small garden in the back, and Jasmine loved waking up to the sound of birds outside their window. She planted herbs near the porch. Daniel bought a grill he never used. They settled in. And, for a while, everything was still. Peaceful. Almost quiet. But Jasmine had lived long enough to know what silence could mean. And this time it was the sound just before everything changed. The early months of marriage were filled with small joys. Jasmine found herself smiling more often, humming softly while making tea in the morning, and adjusting quickly to the rhythm of shared space. Daniel, for his part, seemed content, not exuberant, not passionate, but steady. They moved through life like two people paddling the same boat, neither rushing nor resisting the current. Jasmine kept working at the clinic, her days long and full of motion. She handled it all with her usual grace, though a part of her now longed for something more, something deeper than stability. She had always wanted children, not just in the abstract way that many women entertain the thought, but in the tangible, aching way that had stayed with her since childhood. She dreamed of chubby hands wrapped around her fingers, of giggles in the hallway, of bedtime stories and soft breaths against her neck. She mentioned it casually to Daniel during dinner one evening. He didn't say much, just nodded and continued chewing. She watched his face for signs, interest, concern, even resistance, but saw only the glazed stillness that had begun to settle into him. "We're not getting any younger," she said gently. "I know," he replied, reaching for his glass of water. "Just, let's not rush it." She let it go for the moment, But the weeks passed, then months, and still no child, no conversation, just the slow, disquieting silence that began to thicken between them like fog. Jasmine knew the signs. She'd seen it before. Patients who avoided naming their illnesses, families who tiptoed around grief. Silence could rot a home just as surely as mold in the walls. After almost a year of trying, she scheduled an appointment for herself. Daniel didn't offer to come. "Just let me know what they say," he said without looking up from his laptop. She felt the sting of his absence, but carried it alone. At the clinic, the doctor was kind but direct. Her hormone levels were low. There was still a chance of pregnancy, but it would be difficult. The doctor recommended a specific hormone therapy, a series of injections and medications that would increase her chances. The cost, however, was high. Insurance wouldn't cover it. She brought the pamphlets home, laying them on the table between their plates. Daniel glanced at the heading, his brows twitching as he read. "That's a lot of money," he said flatly. "It could help," Jasmine said. "It's our best option." He leaned back in his chair, sighing through his nose. "Do we really need to do all this right now?" Jasmine didn't answer at first. She folded the papers neatly, then unfolded them again. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "I thought we agreed we wanted a family." He shrugged. "I'm just saying, maybe we wait. Save up." She looked at him then, really looked, at the man she had trusted with her dreams, at the man who once said he'd build a life with her no matter what. But his eyes were tired, his face already turned away. And Jasmine realized with a hollow thud in her chest, he had begun to retreat. That night, she stayed awake long after he had gone to bed. The city outside their window moved on without her, headlights sweeping across the ceiling like ghosts. She stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine a life without children. The thought made her chest tighten. She had sacrificed so much, given so much. She would not give this up too. In the morning, she began researching financial options. She asked the clinic for a payment plan. She picked up extra shifts, working weekends and evenings. She sold an old bracelet her mother had left her, the one she had worn only once on her wedding day. With enough scraped together, she began the treatments in secret. The injections were painful, leaving bruises on her thighs and tenderness in her stomach, but Jasmine didn't complain. She hid the syringes in the bathroom cabinet behind the cotton balls and wrapped the vials in tissue before tossing them away. She kept smiling, kept working, kept pretending that everything was fine. Daniel noticed none of it, or if he did, he said nothing. He began staying late at the office. When he came home, he was quiet, withdrawn. He spent more time in front of the television or scrolling on his phone than talking to her. Their conversations became transactional. "What's for dinner? Did you pay the bill? Don't forget the appointment." There were no more shared books, no walks in the park, no weekend projects, just space. Space and silence. One night, as Jasmine folded laundry on the couch, she found one of Daniel's shirts still faintly smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. It was a delicate scent, floral, expensive. She held it for a long moment, heart clenched tight in her chest before finishing the fold and placing it in his drawer without a word. She didn't confront him, not because she was afraid of the truth, but because she already knew it. Daniel was slipping away, not in one dramatic moment, but in quiet degrees. He was vanishing from their marriage like ink fading from paper, and she didn't know how to stop it. At her next appointment, the doctor told her the treatments were working. Her hormone levels had improved, and her body was responding well. Jasmine felt a flicker of hope, a tiny flame against the vast cold she carried. But that night, when she came home flushed with cautious joy, Daniel barely looked up from the couch. "I got good news," she said, sitting beside him. "The doctor said it's working. I might actually get pregnant." He blinked. "That's great." "Is it?" she asked, voice sharpening despite herself. Daniel frowned. "Why do you say it like that?" "Because you haven't been here," she said, all the weeks of silence breaking loose at once. "Because I'm doing this alone, and I'm tired of pretending that's okay." He stared at her, then slowly stood. "I didn't ask you to do this." Her breath caught. "I didn't ask for 17 syringes in the fridge. I didn't ask for bills we can't afford. I didn't—" "You said you wanted a family," she whispered. He didn't respond, just ran a hand through his hair and walked away, into the kitchen, into the darkness. The next few days passed like a dream, but one with jagged edges. Jasmine moved through them mechanically. She continued her treatments, she went to work, she came home to silence. They no longer shared meals. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, Daniel didn't come home. She waited until midnight, then called. No answer. His phone went straight to voicemail. She waited the next day, and the one after that. Then, finally, she found an envelope on the kitchen table when she returned home from work. Her name was written on the front in small, familiar letters. Inside, a note. Short, final. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. I'm not the man you thought I was. I'm leaving. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Just a vacuum where her marriage had been." Jasmine read the note 3 times before placing it gently on the table. She sat in silence for a long time, her hands clasped in her lap, her body perfectly still. Then she stood, walked into the bedroom, and shut the door. For 2 days, she didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't eat. On the 3rd day, she got up, she washed her face, tied her hair back, and went to her next appointment. The doctor greeted her with a kind smile and a chart in hand. "Well," he said, "you might want to sit down." She did. "There's a development. We ran multiple scans to confirm, and I've never seen anything like this in my career. You're pregnant, Jasmine, and it's not just 1 baby, or 2. She stared at him. "You're pregnant with 17. Her breath left her body. "17 what?" 17 embryos, 17 fetuses, 17 lives growing inside of you. He was already explaining the risks, the protocol, the plans, but Jasmine wasn't listening. She saw Daniel's empty side of the bed, his words, "I can't do this." And then she saw something else. 17 reasons to keep going. 17 reasons to believe that maybe, just maybe, miracles didn't need permission to arrive. She took a breath, sat taller in her chair, and smiled. Jasmine stared at the ultrasound screen in stunned silence, her hands clenched around the edge of the exam table. The doctor had been talking for what felt like forever, explaining terms she could barely process. Multifetal pregnancy, extreme rarity, medical marvel. But her eyes were fixed on the blurred constellation of flickering shapes dancing across the screen. Tiny, rhythmic pulses, one after another, 17 heartbeats. She didn't cry, not then, not even when the doctor paused and looked at her with cautious eyes, waiting for her to collapse under the weight of it all. She just nodded, slowly, as if each motion anchored her to this strange, impossible new reality. 17. She walked home in a daze, the city's familiar sounds muffled as though someone had pressed cotton to her ears. Cars passed, horns honked, snippets of conversation floated around her like smoke. But her mind remained quiet, suspended in a space that existed only between her and the truth now growing inside her. Her body, battered, tired, abandoned, had become a miracle. When she reached the house, Daniel's side of the closet still hung open, a few empty hangers swinging slightly as if recently disturbed. She had left everything untouched since he vanished. Now, it felt like the ghost of a life she no longer had the energy to mourn. Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed and placed a hand against her stomach. It was still flat, still silent. But beneath that silence were 17 flickers of life. It didn't make sense. It wasn't logical, but it was real, and somehow, impossibly, it was hers to carry. The following weeks blurred together in a storm of appointments, consultations, and warnings. Every doctor she met with repeated the same cautious optimism layered over thinly veiled concern. Her case was virtually unheard of. 17 naturally conceived fetuses, each developing in sync, each fighting for space and nutrients inside her. It was a medical event, a case study, a headline waiting to be written. One physician asked if she was willing to consider selective reduction, an unbearable term for an unbearable idea. Jasmine refused before he finished the sentence. These were her children. All of them. She would not choose. She would not discard a single heartbeat. By the 3rd month, her pregnancy had made local news. A nurse from the clinic leaked the story to a blog, and it spread faster than Jasmine could keep up. Calls came in. Messages flooded her inbox. Strangers offered support, advice, prayers. Others offered judgment, suspicion, cruel speculations. But amid the noise, one thing became clear. She was no longer invisible. The attention brought help she hadn't asked for. A maternal health organization reached out, offering assistance with transport, groceries, and medical costs. The state health department assigned a specialist team to oversee her care. Volunteers appeared at her door with home-cooked meals and folded baby blankets. Jasmine accepted the help with quiet gratitude. She didn't want fame. She didn't want to be a symbol. But if these children were going to enter a world already watching, she would ensure they did so with dignity. Her sisters came to stay with her, trading off shifts between their college schedules and part-time jobs. Her mother's cousin, Miss Darlene, a retired midwife with a laugh that could part clouds, moved into the guest room and started reorganizing the house with the efficiency of a drill sergeant. Jasmine, despite the aches and swelling and constant fatigue, finally allowed herself to feel something like hope. But not everything was smooth. Her body bore the weight of 17 lives with growing protest. By the 5th month, her legs ached constantly, her back throbbed, and sleep became a memory. She struggled to eat enough, to drink enough, to move from one room to the next without help. She kept a detailed chart of vitamins, fluids, blood pressure, and fetal activity. Her days were consumed with survival. Every night, she whispered the same thing to her unborn children. "Hold on, I'm doing this for you." She gave each heartbeat a name in her mind, not just placeholders, but identities, personalities. She imagined one liked music, the way he kicked when jazz played. Another felt shy, curling close whenever hands touched her belly. She imagined futures for them, whispered promises into the soft skin of her stretching abdomen. She was no longer alone. And yet, somewhere deep in her bones, loneliness lingered. It came in the quietest hours, when the house was still and the ache in her hips kept her from sleep. It came in the grocery store when she saw fathers pushing strollers or whispering silly things to their partners. It came in the silence where Daniel used to be. He never called, never wrote. She searched for him once, briefly, hoping for some trace online. His social media accounts were gone. His workplace listed him as relocated. He had vanished from her life as completely as if he had never existed. But he had existed. His absence was as real as any presence. One afternoon, as Jasmine lay on the couch with swollen feet elevated on cushions, the doorbell rang. A television crew stood on her front steps, cameras poised, microphones in hand. The reporter smiled too brightly. "We'd love to feature your story," she said. "You're an inspiration." Jasmine stared at them. Her ribs ached. Her ankles throbbed. Her skin stretched taut over a body unrecognizable to her. And yet, beneath all of it, she stood taller. "I'm not a headline," she said softly. "I'm a mother." She closed the door. As her due date approached, the medical team scheduled an early cesarean. The weight on her internal organs was growing dangerous. The risk to her life and theirs rose by the hour. Jasmine nodded through the explanations, the percentages, the fears. She understood the risks, but she had come this far. She would see it through. The night before the surgery, she lay awake in the dim glow of the lamp beside her bed. Her sisters slept on the floor, curled in blankets. Miss Darlene's snores echoed faintly from the next room. Jasmine looked around her small, crowded house. At the peeling wallpaper, the flickering bulb in the hallway, the stack of diapers piled beside her dresser, and felt a wave of something close to peace. 17 heartbeats echoed beneath her skin. She had felt every flutter, every twist, every moment of life. She wasn't afraid. At dawn, the ambulance arrived. The hospital room was bright, humming with controlled urgency. Nurses moved swiftly, voices low and focused. The anesthesiologist explained the procedure again. The surgeon introduced herself. Jasmine nodded through it all. When they wheeled her into the operating room, Jasmine reached down and placed her hand on her belly one last time. "We made it," she whispered. The surgery took over 4 hours. One by one, the babies emerged, tiny, red, wailing with brand new lungs. The room buzzed with astonishment and awe. Doctors called out waits, nurses bustled with blankets and tubes, and Jasmine drifted between exhaustion and tears. 17 girls, each one breathing, each one alive. When it was done, and the room finally settled into quiet, the lead doctor leaned over her and said, "You did something extraordinary." Jasmine managed to smile. "I just held on," she murmured. "They did the rest." News of the birth spread across the country within hours. Headlines blazed with phrases like "record-breaking birth" and "miracle mother of 17." But Jasmine didn't read them. She was too busy listening to the soft symphony of tiny cries and the quiet buzz of machines in the NICU. Each baby had her own incubator. Nurses labeled them A through Q. Until official names could be chosen, Jasmine visited each one, whispering softly, placing a gentle hand on the glass. Her voice was hoarse, her body broken, but her spirit had never been stronger. She named them with care. From Adeline to Quinn, each name chosen for rhythm, for meaning, for strength. In the days that followed, she began to recover, slowly, carefully. And every time she opened her eyes, she reminded herself of one thing. 17 heartbeats had kept her alive, and now it was her turn to keep them alive in return. The days following the birth blurred into one long stretch of beeping monitors, sterile lights, and gentle voices murmuring updates in soft, measured tones. Jasmine was confined to a recovery bed for the first 2 days, her body slowly adjusting to its new emptiness, her mind still grasping the enormity of what she had done. 17 girls. 17 fragile, blinking lives lying in translucent boxes, each no heavier than a bag of sugar, each hooked to machines and wrapped in warmth. Nurses called them miracles. Doctors, even the most clinical ones, used words like divine, unprecedented, unbelievable. But for Jasmine, they were simply her daughters. She had given them life, but it hadn't come easily. Her incision throbbed with every breath, and her limbs felt like they no longer belonged to her. The effort of standing, of walking down the hallway to the NICU, took more strength than she thought she had left. But she pushed herself. Each step was for them. With the help of a nurse and a walker, she made her way down the corridor for the first time on the third morning. She paused at the entrance, heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet activity. Machines hummed. Soft lullabies played from a hidden speaker. Incubators lined the walls in a curved row, each with a neatly labeled chart clipped to the side, and inside, her daughters, 17 of them, so small, so impossibly perfect. A nurse turned and smiled as Jasmine stepped in. "They're doing well," she said gently, "strong like their mother." Jasmine approached the first incubator, peering through the glass at the tiny bundle inside. Her hand trembled as she reached forward, placing her palm gently on the top of the plastic dome. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm here." She visited each child, whispering names she'd carefully chosen during her long hours of bed rest. Adeline, the first to be born, had a determined little chin. Bella, the second, had eyes that fluttered even in sleep. Cameron, Dana, Elise, Faith, Grace, one after the other, she pressed her fingers gently against the glass, her heart stretching to fit them all. The hospital staff watched in quiet reverence. Some had delivered hundreds of babies, but none had seen anything like this. Jasmine became a symbol not just of medical curiosity, but of human endurance. Word spread quickly beyond the hospital walls. Reporters camped outside the entrance, their vans parked in a permanent row, cameras at the ready for any glimpse of the woman now being called Mother of 17. Jasmine had no interest in being a spectacle. She declined interviews, ignored emails, and refused the stream of producers promising book deals and exclusive features. She focused entirely on the routine of feedings, pumping, recovery, and monitoring. Her world had narrowed to 17 lives and one aching, grateful heart. But the world didn't wait for permission. The hospital, under pressure from media outlets and donors, arranged a press conference. Jasmine was too tired to argue. She agreed to attend, but only on her terms. The room was packed. Journalists, bloggers, photographers, and camera crews filled the seats, whispering and shuffling as Jasmine was wheeled in. She wore a soft blue robe, her hair wrapped in a headscarf, her face bare. She didn't smile for the cameras. She didn't pose. She looked at the sea of faces and said, "I didn't ask for attention. I asked for strength. These children didn't come to be famous. They came to be loved. That's my only job." The room fell silent. Then came applause, not loud, not flashy, but respectful. After that, the tone of the coverage shifted. She was no longer portrayed as an oddity or a viral sensation. She became a symbol of resilience. The attention brought unexpected gifts. Donations poured in: diapers, formula, clothing, cribs, toys. An anonymous philanthropist paid off her medical bills. A local nonprofit offered to renovate her home to accommodate the children. Even the state stepped in, recognizing the uniqueness of the case and assigning her a dedicated care team. Social workers, pediatric specialists, nutritionists, all ready to support her as best they could. Jasmine accepted the help, though never with pride, only with humility. She knew she couldn't do it alone, and her pride had long ago been tempered by the reality of survival. But she remained fiercely protective of her daughter's privacy. She allowed no cameras in the nursery. She shared no photos. Their lives belonged to them, not the headlines. At home, preparations began in earnest. Her modest two-bedroom house transformed almost overnight. Contractors knocked down walls, expanded the living room, added new bathrooms. A nursery was constructed along the back of the house with 17 cribs spaced in neat rows, each adorned with a different color. Miss Darlene oversaw every detail like a general organizing her troops. Jasmine, still healing, gave input from the couch, her feet elevated and her eyes often heavy with fatigue. Her sisters were tireless. They took turns caring for Jasmine, organizing donations, responding to well-wishers, and building a rotating schedule for the coming months. There was no father to help, no partner to share the burden. But Jasmine had a village, and in that village she stood like a lighthouse, battered but unyielding. The babies came home one by one. They didn't all leave the hospital at the same time. Some needed extra days, extra monitoring, extra weight. But within a month, all 17 were under her roof. The house filled with new sounds, cries, coos, soft lullabies playing from the corners of rooms. There was barely time to sleep, barely time to eat. Feedings happened every 2 hours. Burping took 3 pairs of hands, and diapers disappeared faster than anyone thought possible. And yet, amid the chaos, there was peace. Jasmine found rhythm in the madness. She memorized the sound of each child's cry, learned to soothe them with a single hum, held them close until they calmed. The physical pain remained. Her incision ached, her joints protested, but the emotional ache that had lived inside her since Daniel left began to dull. She didn't think of him often, but when she did, it was with a strange calm. She no longer burned with anger, no longer wept with betrayal. He had chosen absence. She had chosen life. And in every tiny face that blinked up at her, she found the answer to every doubt she had ever carried. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light poured through the windows, Jasmine sat in the rocking chair with 2 of her daughters in her arms. Her sisters folded laundry nearby. Miss Darlene hummed in the kitchen, and the house buzzed with the soft, chaotic warmth of family. "I didn't know it would be like this," she whispered. One of the babies stirred, a tiny hand brushing Jasmine's collarbone. "But I'm glad it is." Outside, another news van rolled by. A camera lens peered briefly through the fence before retreating. Inside, Jasmine smiled. Not for the world, not for the press, for herself, for them. She had become what the world called a miracle. But to her daughters, she was simply Mom, and that was more than enough. The years that followed unfolded not in leaps, but in thousands of tiny, steady steps. There were no grand turning points, no single moment that marked the transformation of Jasmine's life from survival to stability. Instead, there was the rhythmic pulse of motherhood, an endless cycle of waking, feeding, changing, comforting, working, and hoping. Each day brought new challenges, and each challenge was met with a quiet, enduring strength that came not from ease, but from purpose. Jasmine's home, once modest and cramped, had grown into something closer to a living organism, expanding and adapting in response to the life it sheltered. After the state-funded renovations, the house no longer felt like a burdened space, trying to contain too much. It breathed. The walls had been pushed outward, the ceilings lifted. 17 cribs had eventually given way to 17 beds, each one personalized with a different color, a different blanket, a different shape of stuffed animal. The bedrooms buzzed with whispers, laughter, arguments, and the squeak of worn floorboards under dancing feet. As the girls grew, so did Jasmine. Her body recovered slowly, but her will remained unbroken. The early exhaustion, bone-deep and relentless, was replaced by a kind of sharp, purposeful momentum. She became a master of logistics. Spreadsheets covered everything from school schedules to meal rotations. Appointments were color-coded on a wall-sized calendar. The kitchen had been expanded into a near-commercial space, complete with double ovens, 2 dishwashers, and a refrigerator that buzzed like a hummingbird from constant use. And yet, even with all the systems and support in place, Jasmine never became mechanical. She remained tender, intuitive, aware. She learned the difference between a fever cry and a fear cry. She could comfort a child through a nightmare with just the pressure of her palm on a back. Her love did not divide across 17 children. It multiplied. She gave each of them her attention, her energy, her belief. They were not a unit to her. They were individuals, strong, curious, wildly different, and she loved them all with the same ferocity. By the time the girls turned 4, Jasmine began to dream again, not just of stability, but of the future she had once quietly written in the back of her mind. The clinic. The pediatric center she had imagined since her nursing days, the one she used to save for in secret envelopes. The one that had always seemed too far away to be real. She brought up the idea to Miss Darlene one night after dinner while folding laundry in the quiet hum of the living room. Her voice trembled slightly as she said it. "I want to open the clinic." Miss Darlene didn't hesitate. She set down a neatly folded towel and looked Jasmine in the eye. "Then it's time," she said. It began with a grant application. Jasmine stayed up late every night after the girls went to sleep, researching state funding, federal programs, private foundations. She dug through paperwork until her eyes blurred, rewrote mission statements a dozen times, and called in favors from every contact she had made in the medical community over the years. The same attention to detail that had allowed her to manage 17 children now fueled a business plan, a staffing proposal, a community needs assessment. Word spread quickly. By then, Jasmine's name still held weight. The story of the woman who gave birth to 17 girls and raised them alone had never truly left public consciousness. It resurfaced every few years in magazines, talk shows, online articles titled, "Where Are They Now?" For once, Jasmine used that visibility to her advantage. With community support, state endorsement, and private donations, she secured the funding within a year. Construction began on a plot of land just 5 blocks from her home. She visited the site every day, hard hat sitting awkwardly on her head, eyes gleaming with quiet pride. It wasn't a massive building, but it would be enough to serve the children in her neighborhood, enough to hire staff who cared more about healing than profit, enough to prove to herself and the world that motherhood had not stalled her dreams, it had redefined them. The day the clinic opened, the entire neighborhood gathered. There was no red carpet, no celebrity appearance, just rows of folding chairs, laughter, and the scent of home-cooked food wafting from vendors along the sidewalk. Jasmine stood at the entrance in a deep blue dress, her daughters, now 8 years old, standing beside her, holding hands like a chain of light. When the ribbon was cut, the crowd erupted in applause, not for spectacle, but for gratitude, for what she had done, for what she had built, for what she had survived. Inside, the clinic was painted in warm tones. The waiting room was filled with books and toys. The exam rooms bore murals of trees, oceans, and skies, painted by local artists. Each room was named after one of her daughters, and each bore a small plaque in honor of the girl who inspired this space. The girls watched their mother work with wide, reverent eyes. They saw her greet families, comfort crying toddlers, advise nervous parents. She was no longer just their mother. She was a woman with purpose that stretched beyond their home, and they admired her for it. Over time, the clinic became a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Children who once had no place to go now found care within its walls. Jasmine hired young doctors and nurses who shared her vision, people who believed in dignity over dollars, care over quotas. The clinic thrived not because it was perfect, but because it was needed. And it was honest. Despite her new role, Jasmine never lost sight of her daughters. She remained present at school meetings, recitals, science fairs. She helped with homework, refereed arguments, braided hair. The balance wasn't easy, but she carried it with the same quiet strength she always had. One night, after a long day at the clinic, Jasmine returned home to find the girls preparing a surprise. The living room was decorated with construction paper signs that read, "We love you, Mom, and best doctor in the world." They had made a cake, lopsided, slightly burnt, but beautiful. They sang, loudly and off-key, until Jasmine had to wipe tears from her face. "I didn't do this alone," she said quietly, holding them close. "We built this life together." As the girls drifted off to sleep, Jasmine stood in the hallway, looking at the photographs lining the walls. There were no pictures of Daniel, no trace of the man who had walked away before their story even began. His absence was no longer a wound. It was a fact. Like weather, like time. She had not needed him to become who she was. He had left, and she had risen, not just as a mother, but as a woman, a leader, a builder of hope. In the soft light of her home, surrounded by the daughters she had once carried in a body that nearly broke, Jasmine smiled. The house was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of peace. And it was full, so very full. The seasons moved with quiet consistency as Jasmine's daughters grew into young women, each with her own voice, her own purpose, her own corner of the world to shape. The house, once filled with the sounds of wailing infants and the rush of milk warmers and crinkling diapers, now echoed with the rich, layered chorus of teenage lives. Music drifted from open doors, textbooks lay scattered across dining tables, laughter rolled down hallways like summer wind, and sometimes, yes, there were slammed doors and raised voices, and the difficult pangs of growth and self-discovery. But underneath it all was love, constant and unconditional, as strong as the foundation beneath their feet. Jasmine had built something extraordinary, not only within her home, but within the community that surrounded it. The clinic had become more than a place for medical care. It had become a refuge. Children from all backgrounds arrived with weary eyes and left with bandaged knees, warm smiles, and pockets full of stickers. Parents trusted the space because Jasmine had earned that trust, not through promotion or branding, but through decades of showing up, of listening, of treating everyone who entered with the dignity they deserved. Even as her daughters grew more independent, Jasmine never ceased to be the center of the storm, a quiet, grounding force that kept everything moving in balance. She sat front row at debates, cried in the crowd at recitals, and helped edit college applications late into the night. They called her Mama, or just Ma, but their eyes said something more. They revered her. She had given them everything. She had made the impossible ordinary. And so, when the past finally returned, It arrived not with thunder or warning, but in the quietest way imaginable. On a Tuesday afternoon under a sky that held no sign of change. The clinic had just closed for the day. Jasmine stood by the front desk, speaking softly to one of the newer nurses about inventory management. She wore a long gray cardigan over her scrubs, a pen still tucked behind one ear. Her hair, streaked now with elegant silver, was pulled into a low bun, and her face bore the lines of laughter and labor, of survival and unshakable pride. The glass door swung open with a chime. She turned, expecting perhaps a delivery or a neighbor with a late question, but the man who stepped inside made her breath catch before she even registered why. Time had changed him. He was thinner now, his shoulders less square, his once styled hair reduced to a salt and pepper shadow. He wore no wedding ring. His clothes were neat but plain. His eyes, once filled with effortless charm, held something unfamiliar. Regret, perhaps, or shame. Maybe both. "Jasmine," he said. His voice hadn't changed. It still had that same easy cadence, but it fell heavy now, like a stone dropped into still water. She didn't move. Her hands remained clasped in front of her, and her back, straight and unwavering, gave no indication of surprise. She simply blinked slowly, as if she had already imagined this moment 1,000 times. "I heard about the clinic," he added after a beat. I didn't know you stayed here." "I never left," she said. There was no accusation in her tone, only fact, a simple truth laid bare. Daniel stepped further inside. The nurse at the desk looked up in mild confusion, but Jasmine waved her away gently. She and Daniel stood in the quiet of the waiting room, surrounded by hand-painted murals and plastic chairs. He glanced around, taking in the warmth of the space, the detail, the life it held. "You built all this?" he said, almost to himself. "I did." He hesitated, then asked, "And the girls?" "They're thriving," she answered. "Some are in college, one's in med school, another just started her own art collective. They're bold, brilliant, everything they should be." A long silence followed. Jasmine studied him the way one might study an old photograph, familiar and distant all at once. "I've thought about you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "About them. For years." "But you didn't come," she replied. "You didn't write. You didn't ask." "I didn't know how," he admitted. "You knew how to leave." The words weren't said with venom, only clarity, the kind that comes when pain has long since hardened into memory. "I was scared," he said. "Back then, 17 kids, I couldn't imagine it. I didn't believe I could be what you needed. So I ran." She tilted her head slightly. "You didn't run. You vanished." He looked down, nodding, his hands twisting in front of him. "I'm not proud of it. I lost everything eventually. Marriage, job, friends. I moved overseas for a while, tried to start over, but it always came back to this." He looked up. "To you, to them." Jasmine stood still, arms crossed now as if shielding herself not from his presence, but from the wave of history rising between them. "Why now?" she asked. "I was driving someone here, a ride-share job, dropped off a woman and saw your name on the door, and I couldn't believe it. I had to come in." He laughed, but it was hollow. "Guess fate has a sense of humor." She didn't laugh. Instead, she studied him again, more deeply this time. She saw the lines of regret etched into his face, the years of guilt carved into his posture. But she also saw that he still wanted something, maybe forgiveness, maybe a chance to rewrite the end of a story he had walked out of before the second chapter. "I'm not here to disrupt anything," he said, voice lowering. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not that it fixes anything, I know that, but I had to say it. Jasmine felt a strange stillness settle over her. A part of her had dreamed of this moment in the early days, before the cries and feedings had filled the silence. She used to imagine him begging for forgiveness, for a place in their lives. In those fantasies, she had cried, or screamed, or embraced him. But now, with him standing here, diminished and haunted, she felt none of those things. She felt peace. "You left before the story started," she said softly, "and we wrote it without you." He nodded again, helplessly. "The girls don't know you," she continued. "They don't speak of you. I never lied to them. I told them the truth, that you were afraid, that you left. But I never filled that space with anger. I filled it with love, with presence." Tears welled in his eyes, but she did not reach for him. "I'm not angry anymore," she said, "but I don't owe you anything." "I understand," he whispered. She stepped closer, her expression unwavering. "You abandoned 18 lives that day," she said. "Mine, theirs, and then you went on living like none of it mattered. But we lived every single day with the weight of your absence, and we turned it into strength." He wiped his face quickly. "I see that now. I hope you do." They stood in silence for a while, and then Jasmine gently nodded toward the door. "I wish you peace," she said, "but not presence. That's been filled." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around the clinic once more, at the mural of a tree on the far wall, its branches stretching wide and strong. Then he walked out. Jasmine stood for a long while after he left. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She simply breathed long and deep and allowed the quiet to settle around her. That night, at home, her daughters noticed something different in her gaze. "Long day?" one of them asked, passing her a cup of tea. "Yes," Jasmine said, "but a good one." She sat with them on the couch as the room filled with music and warmth and the smell of something baking in the oven. The door had opened, and it had closed again, and nothing inside had changed. The days after Daniel's visit passed without ceremony, without echo. He had come and gone like a shadow moving across a familiar wall, fleeting, powerless, unable to change the foundation it brushed against. Jasmine told no one at first. She didn't mention his name to her daughters, didn't retell the story to Miss Darlene, didn't offer it up during late-night conversations with her sisters over cups of chamomile tea. It wasn't secrecy. It was protection, instinctive and absolute. Her life had never been about him, and she wouldn't give him the dignity of shaping its conclusion. What he had left behind was not a question, but a certainty. She had done it. Alone, yes, but not unloved. And she had never been truly alone, not with 17 daughters growing alongside her, each one a mirror reflecting strength back at her from a different angle. By now, the girls were women in their own right, though Jasmine often caught glimpses of their younger selves in the curve of a smile or the cadence of their laughter. Their lives branched out in every direction. Some still lived at home. Others came back only on weekends or holidays, their arms full of laundry and stories. There were textbooks scattered across the dining room table, dance shoes by the front door, notes pinned to the fridge about internships and interviews. One of the girls, Cameron, had recently been accepted to a graduate program in pediatric medicine and planned to one day take over the clinic her mother had built. Another, Quinn, had won a national poetry prize for a piece called 17 Daughters, which she had read on stage with her mother sitting in the front row, her heart swelling with pride so sharp it nearly ached. And through it all, Jasmine remained the center. She was no longer chasing peace. She had found it, and now she simply nurtured it. Her mornings were quiet, her routines well worn. The clinic ran smoothly, the staff well-trained and fiercely loyal. Jasmine continued to work part-time, her presence more symbolic now than necessary. But the families who came through the doors still asked for her, still wanted a moment of her time, a piece of her wisdom. She never turned them away. She was invited to speak often, at universities, conferences, schools. At first, she declined. Then, slowly, she began to accept. Not because she sought recognition, but because she realized the power of her story was not in the spectacle of 17 births, but in the truth of what followed. The work, the choices, the strength born of necessity. She stood before crowds and told them what no headline ever had, that motherhood was not magic, it was muscle. It was forged through exhaustion, sacrifice, and love so relentless it bordered on holy. At one such event, she was asked, "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" She smiled, the kind of smile that held no bitterness, only memory. "No," she said, "because everything I have now was built from what I survived. I am who I am because I had to be." After the talk, a young woman approached her in tears. She had grown up in foster care, never knowing her parents. She said Jasmine's story made her believe that strength could be inherited in different ways, that family could be chosen, built, even created in the face of absence. Jasmine took her hands and told her she was already strong because she had already endured. At home that evening, Jasmine walked into a living room filled with her daughters, now spread across every inch of space. They were home for her birthday, though she had insisted she didn't want a party. Of course, they ignored her completely. There were balloons taped to the ceiling, dishes of her favorite food set out on the long dining table, and a cake shaped like a stethoscope, complete with a frosting heartbeat running across the top. Jasmine laughed, real, deep laughter that brought tears to her eyes. She let herself be led to the center of the room where 17 young women surrounded her in a circle, each holding a candle. One by one, they spoke. "For every year you gave without rest. For every time you stayed when others ran. For the nights you went without so we didn't have to. For the way you taught us to rise." Each voice layered upon the next until Jasmine stood in the center of a storm of gratitude, of recognition. Her heart swelled in her chest and she wept, not from sorrow, but from the sheer immensity of what they had become. She had raised not just daughters, but forces of nature. They lit the candles together and sang, their voices imperfect, joyful, full of memory. The song wasn't polished, it wasn't rehearsed, but it was theirs. Later, as the night wound down, Jasmine sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passing, porch lights blinking, the distant echo of music from another house. Inside, the home was warm, filled with low chatter and the rustle of wrapping paper, the clink of dishes being stacked in the sink. Cameron joined her, leaning on the window frame. "You okay, Ma?" Jasmine nodded, eyes on the moon. "Better than okay." There was a pause. "He really came back, didn't he?" Cameron asked, voice low. Jasmine didn't flinch. "He did. And I let him go again." Cameron didn't ask for more. She simply nodded and wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulder. They sat in silence, watching the sky, the way only two people who have lived through everything together can. Jasmine thought of the years behind her, the fear, the ache, the impossible decisions. She thought of the letter Daniel had left, the way she had stood at the edge of devastation and chosen instead to build, to carry, to love. And now, standing at the other side of that life, she saw not ruin, but resurrection. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, and for a moment the room quieted. One of the girls answered it and returned with a large envelope addressed to Jasmine. It bore the seal of the city council. Inside was a letter informing her that she had been nominated and selected for the Community Honor of Lifetime Achievement. A ceremony would be held in her name. The clinic would be permanently renamed the Jasmine Brown Center for Healing and Hope. She didn't cry this time. She simply smiled, folded the letter, and looked around at the home she had built with her bare hands, her beating heart, and the kind of love that never asked for anything in return. That night, when the house was finally still, she walked down the hallway, pausing at the doorway to each room. Some were dark, others lit by desk lamps or fairy lights. In one, 2 of her daughters slept, heads close together. In another, soft music played while someone typed on a laptop. In the last room, an easel stood by the window, a half-finished portrait drying in the moonlight. She stepped into her own room, sat on the edge of her bed, and opened the old journal she kept in her nightstand drawer. The one she had started writing in the week Daniel left. The one filled with prayers, fears, shopping lists, and late-night promises to children she hadn't yet met. She turned to the first page and wrote, in neat, careful letters, "I was never abandoned. I was chosen to endure. And now, I choose joy." She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and climbed into bed. As she pulled the blanket up to her shoulders, a gentle breeze drifted in through the open window. It smelled of magnolia and something else, something strong and sweet and almost holy. Jasmine Brown slept peacefully that night. She had 17 reasons to be strong, and not one reason to look back. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch our next videos for more powerful stories, and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.